Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Chronic Fatigue and Burnout Recovery podcast. Today I wanted to do an episode kind of rehashing probably some things that I've spoken about previously on the podcast, but looking at chronic fatigue through this lens or concept or metaphor of an overflowing bucket. But specifically looking at it in the context of mast cells and the cell danger response. So if you haven't already found my episodes on mast cells or the cell danger response, then all you really need to do is just go to my website, annamarsh.co.uk, and you can just do a search either in the blog or the podcast. It doesn't actually matter. But just put in like mast cells or MCAS or histamine and you should find that episode, or you can search in Spotify or iTunes, and you can also search for the cell danger response and you'll find my episode on that. So today it's really about circling back to some of these concepts, but looking at it, or shall I say, looking at chronic fatigue through this lens of how does someone end up with chronic fatigue syndrome with our understanding of mast cells and with our understanding of the cell danger response. How did you get here? How did we get here? Obviously, everybody gets here a little bit differently, but there are commonalities in the stories, in the timelines with the clients that I work with in the one-to-one practice. Where I'm hearing stories, each individual story, like week after week after week. Every time I enroll a new client, you hear someone's story and you start to obviously see the patterns and the trends over time. And then that can be really helpful in working out what's going on for people. The ongoing theme, I guess, for a lot of people is it's just this gradual wear and tear on the body that has been going on for a really long time, whether that is early life trauma, developmental trauma, just lots of chronic stress and instability and dysregulation across a lifetime. And then maybe also exposure to things like mold, getting lots of infections as a younger child and as a younger adult, taking lots of courses of antibiotics, maybe exposure to, certain chemicals, for example, like heavy metals, if someone had mercury fillings or whatnot. And then other infections too, like, chronic viral infections, low immunity, the list goes on and on and on. But there's this, stacking of things that happens over time. And eventually there can be this, I guess, gradual wear and tear on the system that just breaks everything down, like grinding to a halt. That was a little bit more of my experience. I think I mentioned in a previous episode this concept of like circling the drain. So there can be this like circling the drain and then, things are happening. But first of all, the incidents are quite far apart. And then as time goes on, they just get closer and closer and closer together. And everything just feels like it's stacking up and then it's all just too much. Or in some people's cases, it can also be just there was a single incident that was the point of no return. So someone gets a certain viral infection, or maybe they even have a vaccination of some sort. And then all of a sudden, everything changes. But even in those cases where it seemed very sudden, there were probably lots of things that were still wearing the system down. But then that final thing just overwhelmed the body to a point that it could no longer continue as it was before. So that's usually what is happening to a lot of people who experience chronic illness and chronic fatigue syndrome more specifically. But I kind of just today, and it won't be a very long episode because I don't want to go into overwhelm you with too much detail and too much depth, but just to kind of look at this through the lens of the cell danger response and through the mast cells. So as I've said already, I have previously done an episode on mast cells and histamine, but mast cells are really just a type of white blood cell that are found in connective tissues all throughout the body. So typically mast cells are located in the boundaries between the internal and external environment. So they're the first line of defense on the mucosal surfaces. So they're in the lungs, they're in the digestive tract, they're in the skin. They can also be found in blood vessels, in lymph vessels, and in our nerves. So mast cells can affect our nervous system. And mast cells, when they become activated, produce a variety of inflammatory molecules. One of the ones we hear about all the time is histamine, but really something kind of cool or not cool to understand about mast cells is that mast cells have got lots of different receptor sites on them. So they're a single cell, but they've got a variety of different receptor sites. And basically, different things can attach to these receptor sites. So you could have a pathogen which attaches to a receptor site. You could have like a mold mycotoxin which attaches to a receptor site. You could have your own hormones which attach to a receptor site. You could have an antibody which attaches to a receptor site. You could have a chemical that attaches to a receptor site. So there's loads of different receptor sites on a mast cell, and then loads of potential triggers for a mast cell. And we often talk about histamine, but it's also important to understand that mast cells basically just are responsible for producing inflammation in the body. And if mast cells are constantly being triggered, because there's so many receptors, there's so many different ways that we can trigger the mast cells, that keeps the body in a state of chronic inflammation. And it is this chronic inflammation that costs the body energy, because we have to direct energy away from the brain, away from the metabolic system, towards the immune system. And it's that redirection of energy, which is what produces a lot of the symptoms. I think you may have heard me say in previous podcasts that when we get an acute infection, like a viral infection, the symptoms are not because of the pathogen, the virus. The symptoms are because of the changes that the body is creating to fight the virus. And therefore, we redirect our resources elsewhere. And that's why we feel tired. That's why we have headaches. That's where we get brain fog. That's where we get out of breath and struggle to walk up a flight of stairs, or our muscles ache, or all the different symptoms that could be associated with an acute illness are because of the resources in the body getting redirected towards the immune system. And the same is true in chronic illness. We have a redirection of resources in the context of this episode. There's the mast cells are being activated, and then there's a redistribution of resources to maintain the chronic inflammation in the body. And that is what essentially does create the symptoms of chronic illness. So this chronic activation of the mast cells, it costs us. It costs us our energy, and it costs us our health. And the thing is, and the thing to understand in terms of chronic illness, is it's usually not just one thing. So some people can have, they can have dysbiosis in their gut, but they don't have chronic fatigue. They just have a bad gut. Or some people can, have some food sensitivities, but they don't have chronic illness, or they don't have chronic fatigue. They just have some food sensitivities. And for the most part, they function pretty well. But when we're looking at chronic illness, what there usually is that there's usually a chronic dysregulation of the mast cells where they become overly reactive. And this is due to an overexposure of triggers over time. So it's not just a dysbiotic gut, or it's not just some food sensitivities, or it's not that you had a viral infection. It's not just that you have some nutrient deficiencies. For a lot of people, it's a collection of different things over time. The kind of cocktail, so to speak, is chemical exposure, which could include toxins like mold mycotoxins being a really big one. Pathogens, like, for example, gut infections. Maybe there's some leaky gut. Maybe there's some endotoxemia. I've created episodes on those as well. And then ongoing chronic stress. And it's this activation of all these different receptors on the mast cells that then starts to produce all these different inflammatory signaling molecules. And this is one of the underlying causes of the sensitivity in those people who are chronically ill. So light sensitivity, sound sensitivity, sensitivity to smells, to chemicals, to medications, to foods, supplements, in some cases EMFs. Like I work with some clients who are very, very sensitive to EMFs. They couldn't even wear the visible armband because of the EMFs associated. So we basically have a lot of different things which have stacked up over time. And then as these things stack up over time, the immune cells, in this case, the mast cells, become increasingly dysregulated. And then the sensitivity of the body goes up because now the body is just perceiving anything as a threat. Too much light, a threat. Too much sound, a threat. EMFs, a threat. And so on and so on and so on. And basically, what has really happened is that there have just been a buildup of threats over time that has overwhelmed the body's ability to respond. And as a consequence of that, what happens is we then enter the cell danger response. Now, I have done an episode on the cell danger response previously, so feel free to go and listen to that if you would like to. But basically, the cell danger response is the body's universal response for threat. And it's a theoretical model, which was developed by Dr. Robert Naviaux. And I think he won a Nobel Prize for the model. But basically, it's a model which describes how the body copes with danger, how the body copes with threat. And there are three main stages. So you have the cell danger response 1, the cell danger response 2, the cell danger response 3. And so if we're in a cell danger response 1, the purpose of the cell danger response 1 is to respond to threats, and it's supposed to contain the threat and deal with the threat. And if you've been having these kind of like low level inputs over time, the gut infections, the mold exposure, the chemical exposure, the chronic stress, and then you have a viral infection, shall we say, or maybe you have a vaccination, and then the body's just like, whoa, this is just too much. And it may go into the cell danger response 1, where we create biochemical changes to contain the threat. And this is where, someone can get stuck in this threat mode where they are just constantly trying to contain things. It's very difficult to move the body forwards. And those people tend to be the most ill, and they also tend to be the most sensitive because the body is in this heightened state of danger. Then we can move the body into the cell danger response 2, which is where the body starts to repair and replace damaged cells. However, we can still get stuck in these different stages. So a healthy individual would move organically. Okay, there's a threat. I respond. I contain the threat. We move into repairing and replacing the damaged cells. And then we move into cell danger response 3, which is about differentiation and then the development. So we're starting to develop more of the natural physiology again. But we can get stuck in any of these stages. And what we're really trying to do in our healing journey is to help the body move out of the CDR1 and then into the CDR2, and we want successful repair, we want successful replacement of damaged cells, and then we move into CDR3, which is where we start to create these better connections again in the different systems of the body, and the cell danger response is turned off, and we go back to regular, normal, and healthy functioning. So coming back to this idea of this bucket where everything is overflowed, too many things have come in, the body goes into the cell danger response, and now we can potentially become very ill. But we also know that people with chronic fatigue and chronic illness, some people don't get really stuck. Some people don't get completely ill to the point that they really struggle to do anything because they're so sensitive. So I think if we're kind of building on this model, if you're someone who has some capacity, but you're not so bedbound, housebound, very, very limited, it could be that you're still in some sort of state of stuckness, but maybe in a state of stuckness somewhere else in that cell danger response model. So we're really trying to look at, how did the body end up in this place in the first place? Healing happens when we can identify the real underlying triggers for the cell danger response. And for some people, it can be one or two core things, but for a lot of the clients we work with, it's quite a few different things. Especially the longer they've been unwell, the more systems of the body have become dysregulated, and therefore there's more things that we need to work with and deal with. As I said already, like mold is a big one. Gut infections or imbalances in the gut are another really big one. But there can be other things going on too. Hormonal imbalances, issues with detoxing, being, chronic state of stress and really, really sensitive nervous system. And we need to unwind all of that at a pace which is right for the person. So understanding your case history and your unique set of triggers and imbalances is what can potentially support your healing journey. However, if you're listening to this podcast and you might not necessarily know or have uncovered yet everything that's going on, there's also just a reminder to come back to the basics. What we're really trying to do is understanding that the cell danger response model is being created with the idea in mind that the body's ability to respond has become overwhelmed. We've got all these different triggers in, they're binding to receptor sites on the mast cells. The mast cells are producing all these inflammatory molecules, and the body is going, whoa, this is a lot. I'm overwhelmed. I can't cope. We're just going to get stuck here. And so then what we're really trying to do is reduce the level of threat in the system. Bring the system back to a relative sense of safety, because it's the relative sense of safety that helps to shift from CDR1 to CDR2 to CDR3. The stuckness is something doesn't feel safe enough to complete. And so if we're looking to create a relative sense of safety, this is why I talk so much about the basics on the podcast and why the basics matter, the importance of stabilizing the system, because it's an unstable system that feels threatened. The more stability, the more safety, the less threat. So we come back again and again and again to those stabilizing factors. Nervous system support, whether that's taking a somatic nervous system program like the Nurturing Resilience subscription, whether that's signing up to some sort of brain retraining program, or whether that's just supporting your nervous system in the ways that you know how, time in nature, cuddling your pets, doing some yoga, meditation, and maybe some other tools that you already have and know that work for you. Blood sugar stability. Because when our blood sugar is stable, we're not having those highs and lows that feel threatening to the system. Circadian rhythms, so light and dark, light and dark. We need the whole body, and the whole immune system is governed by our exposure to light. And, as I'm recording this now, it's the very beginning of November. It's getting darker in the morning. It's getting darker in the evening. We want to stay inside. We want to be warm. We want to be in our artificially light homes. And it's really important that we get outside, to the degree that our capacity will let us, of course, and get that natural sunlight on our eyes. First thing in the morning, if you can, 3 minutes on a sunny day, 20 minutes on a cloudy day, and if it's in between, somewhere in between that. So that circadian rhythm is just really important for helping the system to stabilize, especially if you are someone who has a lot of mast cell and histamine issues. But even if you don't, it still applies to you. And just that pacing, rest and sleep. If the body is in a state of threat and all its energetic resources are being prioritized towards the immune system and maintaining the inflammatory response, trying to do too much and push through is just putting more pressure on the body than what it needs right now. So even if you don't know where to start in your healing journey, you can start with these things. Nervous system support, you can join the subscription. It's, only £39 a month, which is super affordable. You could take the blood sugar mini course that I have on my website, which is only £49. So super affordable. You can get up at the same time each day, go to bed at the same time each day, make sure you get morning light on your eyes, and then you can pace, rest, and sleep to the best of your ability. If you were to just do those 4 things, would it get you the whole way through your journey? Maybe not, but it would surely get you further along in your journey than what you might be experiencing right now. Or it would at least help to stabilize you enough so that you could then start to work on some of the more complex pieces of the puzzle in terms of dealing with mold or dealing with infections or things like that. So what I really wanted to achieve today was just kind of like understanding like what's going on in the body, like why we get unwell. And we get unwell because the body has got to a point where it feels so threatened that it can no longer cope. And then the cell danger response initiates. And if you want to understand a little bit more about that cell danger response, then go back and listen to the episode where I talk about that specifically. I should have probably prepared with finding the episode number. Let me just pause and see if I can do that for you. So it's episode 6, one of the very, very beginning episodes where I talk more about the cell danger response. And then I talk about mast cell activation and histamine intolerance in a little bit more detail in episode 42. So those are 2 follow-up episodes that you can listen to that will go very nicely with this episode. But I hope this has just helped to put things into context for you in a little bit of a better way. I know, especially like in the early stages of the journey, we're trying to understand what's going on. And especially if you don't have a science-based background or you don't have a human physiology-based background or biochemistry background, it can be really, really tricky to grasp what's going on in the body. So that's what today is all about, to just help you understand some of these mechanisms, and also that there's no just do this and you'll get better. There's usually a series of steps that need to happen, and they need to happen in a way which is unique for the individual. And it's usually not one thing that makes us unwell, but it's a collection of things which stack over time, which tip us over into this point where the body no longer has enough safety. And really the journey of healing is coming back to safety, whether that's safety in the nervous system or getting rid of some of those infections in your body or sorting things out in your life, creating routines that support safety in the body, whatever it is for you. So thank you so much for listening today. I'll leave on the note of just asking you to leave a review if you haven't already. You can leave a review on Spotify or iTunes. Your reviews help other people to find the podcast, improves the podcast rankings, and then more people get to benefit from this work. So have a wonderful fatigue recovery day, and I'll see you in the next episode.